I remember the first time I drove down that forgotten road, the one swallowed by mist and shadow. The headlights barely cut through the fog, painting the trees in ghostly streaks of pale light. Every mile felt slower than the last, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Somewhere in the distance, a faint humming began. Low, rhythmic, almost like the house itself was breathing. I passed an old abandoned motel, its signs swinging and groaning in the wind, letters missing, windows dark and empty. I could feel the quiet pressing against me, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but expectant. Somewhere inside that darkness, something watched. And though I tried to tell myself it was only my imagination, a shiver slid down my spine when I saw the door at the far end of the parking lot creak open. The wind carried no sound. The air carried no warmth, and yet I felt eyes. That's when I saw it. The rain hit the windshield in heavy, slow sheets. I parked under the flickering sign of a roadside motel. The neon buzzed, orange and hesitant. I didn't want to drive anymore. I just wanted dry walls and a bed. The room smelled of damp carpet and something older, something forgotten. The sheets were crisp. They smelled faintly of bleach and cold linen. I ran my fingers over them. It should have felt safe. It didn't. The lights flickered. A soft, irregular rhythm. Not enough to panic, just uneven, like the room was breathing. I leaned back on the bed. The air pressed against my skin, cool, damp. Then I noticed it. A whisper. Not a word. Not a voice, just a thread of sound in the corner of the room. It was gone when I turned. Gone like mist curling into itself. The shadow waited. It never stood still, never fully formed. Just a dark suggestion at the edge of vision. When I tried to focus, it stretched, dissolved, reappeared. I felt it watching, not from the corner, but from somewhere, deeper. The air shifted. A cold wave rolled over my shoulders, brushing down my spine. Each breath left a small fog before me. I could see it, taste it, feel it. It lingered long after the warmth of the bed should have taken it away. The TV was off. I hadn't touched it, but static murmured low, filling the corners of the room. A hum under the hum of the flickering light. Soft, persistent. I leaned closer. Nothing but shifting white. And still, the whisper. I tried to move, tried to leave the bed, but the air thickened around me. The shadow drifted just beyond my reach. The room tilted in silence. Even the rain outside seemed distant, muffled, like it was afraid too. I pressed my hands into the sheets. The texture should have reassured me. Instead, it felt slick, almost damp beneath my fingers. My heart slowed, then stuttered. Each pulse was a reminder that I was alone. Alone, but not alone. The whisper grew sharper, more insistent, but never forming words. It curled around the edges of the room. I could almost see it, a ripple in the pale light. Soft footsteps, maybe mine, maybe not, brushed across the carpet. I held my breath. The air held me back. Time became uneven. Seconds stretched into minutes. The shadow lengthened, then shrank like it was breathing with the room. I turned to face it. It dissolved into the darkness. But the cold stayed. The whisper stayed. I lay back down. Pulled the sheets closer, though they offered no warmth. The static hummed. The flickering light pulsed. The whisper circled me, careful, patient. I didn't move. The room sighed with me. The shadow lingered just beyond sleep. The air pressed, soft and unrelenting, and I listened, until I stopped listening, until the whisper became part of the hum, the flicker part of the darkness. The rain tapped the window. I closed my eyes. I thought I could rest, but I knew. I wasn't alone. The hall stretched pale and empty. Dust hung in the air, thick, silent. The moon seeped through broken windows, cold and hesitant. I stepped lightly. My shoes whispered against the cracked tiles. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old wood. Alone. Too alone. Then I heard it. Soft. Deliberate. Footsteps. They echoed down the hall. Slow at first. Then faster, matching my heartbeat. Each tap. A mirror of the pulse in my chest. I froze. The pale light flickered above, blinking. Warning or greeting. I couldn't tell. The steps paused outside my door. I pressed my ear to the wood. The rhythm stopped. Silence. The dust on the floor stirred with nothing. I could almost see the footsteps lingering, hanging in the air. A shiver brushed my spine. The cold seemed to seep from the walls themselves. I leaned back against the door. The hallway light shivered again, long and hesitant. Then, the steps returned. Ascending, up the stairs that led nowhere, I followed with my eyes. The shadowed staircase rose, pale and unreal, empty, but the steps moved still. They rustled against the old boards. Higher, higher, fading. The air shifted around me. Warm, then cold, then warm again. A sigh carried from the corners of the building. I could smell damp stone and distant smoke. The hallway pressed close, bending toward me. I thought I saw movement, a shadow slipping along the wall, slower than my pulse, more patient than I was willing to be. The steps stopped. I held my breath. The silence stretched. The pale light flickered one last time. Then it steadied. I pressed my hand to the wood again. No warmth. No life, just absence. I didn't move. Didn't dare. The hall was too quiet now. Too wide. Too empty. The air smelled faintly of rain. Even the distant dripping slowed. The building seemed to settle around me, but I knew. The steps could return. At any time, I felt them before I heard them. A presence, patient, lingering. And then, nothing. I exhaled slowly. The dust lay still. The hallway light hummed pale. The stairs rose silently. Alone, and waiting. The room smelled faintly of damp carpet and stale air. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the window, slow, uneven. The pale light from the hallway spilled across the floor. I noticed the closet in the corner, the door slightly ajar. I had locked it before leaving. I was certain. The gap felt alive. A shadow shifted inside, though nothing moved. The air smelled faintly of old smoke. And something else. Something metallic, faint, lingering. I stepped closer. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight. The door trembled. Soft, almost imperceptible. Like breathing, I ran my fingers along the wood. Rough, worn. Scratches etched deep, jagged, unreadable. And then, a cold handprint appeared. I hadn't left it there. The chill pressed against my palm. It lingered, stubborn, almost living. The closet seemed to watch me. Each creak, each shift echoed in the quiet. The rain faded into a distant hum. I pressed closer, nose near the edge. The scent of old smoke filled my nostrils, heavy, suffocating. I imagined the door moving on its own, slowly, softly, breathing with the room. It whispered, almost inaudible, across the wooden edge. A sigh, a rustle, the shiver of something unseen. My shadow stretched across the floor, trembling. I could feel the air tighten, pressing against my chest. The handprint burned cold where I touched it. I pulled back, yet I couldn't leave my gaze. The closet remained still, yet alive, patient, watching, waiting. The scratches seemed deeper now, jagged lines endless in their small, quiet rhythm. A memory etched into the wood, or something waiting to be remembered. I breathed slowly. The air felt damp, alive. My ears caught every tiny creak, every subtle shift. The handprint faded, but the chill lingered. The closet, still open, still watching. I stepped away, pulling the door gently closed. It resisted slightly, as if reluctant to leave me alone. When it finally settled, the air sighed. The rain outside began again, soft, insistent. I didn't touch it again. I didn't need to. The presence remained, patient, silent, and just beyond reach. I lay back on the bed. The window trembled in the wind. The closet stood, quiet, its breath barely moving the air. Alone. Alone with the quiet hum of something that shouldn't be there. Midnight pressed against the windows. Fog spilled across the parking lot, thick and slow. The air smelled damp, heavy with wet asphalt and cold rain. I saw her, pale, standing just beyond the edge of the lot. She drifted, almost floating, silent and still. Her presence pressed against the glass even at a distance. I tried to speak. My voice cracked, swallowed by the dense air. Only my own breath answered me, visible in the cold, heavy room. The fog shifted. Her shape moved with it, drifting closer, a gentle, inevitable slide. The pale light from the street lamp caught her outline, but not her face. It was hidden, blurred, as if the fog itself refused to let me see. A rustling came from behind me. Soft, deliberate, the carpet underfoot whispered. I spun. Nothing. But when I looked back to the window, she was closer. The parking lot seemed to contract. The fog wrapped around her, around the cars, around me. My chest pressed tight with air I couldn't draw fully. The hum of the distant highway faded into silence. I watched her drift again. Slow, patient, unhurried. The cold seeped into my bones. I could feel her presence against my skin, even through the glass. I reached for the window. The glass was cold, almost wet beneath my fingertips. Her shadow stretched longer, leaning toward me. Each heartbeat thundered in my ears, but I didn't hear her move. Only the rustle, soft, near, behind me again. I swallowed the air. The fog swirled, almost alive. She remained, drifting just beyond the light. And yet I knew she was not outside alone. The room trembled with a quiet sigh. The air thickened, pressing against my lungs. I could feel the cold touch of her presence. Soft waiting, patient, time slowed. The fog curled between the lamps, bending the edges of the lot. Her figure swayed gently, almost curious, almost tender, and then the rustling stopped. Only the hum of the cold night. I backed from the window. The room felt smaller, tighter. The air tasted faintly of wet metal and smoke. The pale figure lingered, barely moving, watching. I lay down on the bed, pulled the blanket close. Her shape remained at the edge of my vision. The fog swirled. The night held its breath, alone, and yet not. The hum of the cold, the rustling that had faded, the press of air, all of it whispered. She was still there. I closed my eyes. The rain tapped lightly on the glass. The fog shifted in silence. Her presence lingered just beyond reach, waiting. The bathroom smelled of damp tile and faint mildew. Steam curled slowly from the drain, thick and slow. The pale light above flickered, hesitant. The shower turned on. By itself, water hissed softly against the tiles. Warm at first, then uneven, trembling, like the room itself was nervous. Over the hum, I heard voices, soft, distorted, calling my name, whispering, echoing in the corners where the fog pooled. I pressed my hands to the cool tile. The air smelled faintly of wet metal and faint smoke. The mirror fogged over. Shapes emerged, shifting, impossible to grasp. Curves and shadows that didn't belong. My reflection warped and dissolved into something else. I blinked. It wasn't there anymore. I reached for the knob. The water went cold. A shiver ran from my fingertips through my arms. The voices faded, leaving a low hum, soft, patient. Steam clung to the walls. The tiles were slick beneath my touch. The fog twisted with the breath I didn't realize I was holding. The mirror, still hazy, suggested movement. Not mine. I leaned closer. The air pressed against my face, heavy, damp. Shapes swirled in the fog just at the edge of vision. I couldn't tell if they were inside the glass or behind it. The shower hissed again, weak, hesitant. The temperature wavered. The voices returned, soft, almost curious. The tiles underfoot seemed to tilt. Steam curled around my shoulders, clinging like a weight. I stepped back. The mirror fog shifted, clearing slightly. The shapes receded. The hum lingered, low, insistent. A presence, patient and still. I touched the cold faucet again. Nothing moved. The room exhaled. The water settled into silence. The voices faded, leaving only the steady drip of condensation. I breathed slowly. The fog swirled, thick but harmless now. The pale light steadied. The shower remained quiet. I left the room. The tiles glistened faintly in the dim light. The mirror remained fogged, holding its secrets, alone. And yet, the memory of whispered names lingered, soft, patient, almost waiting. I returned after dinner. The rain had slowed outside, leaving the asphalt wet and glistening. The pale hallway light flickered faintly as I approached the room. Something was off. The furniture shifted. Not drastically, but enough. The bed faced the opposite wall. Nothing should have moved. Nothing had. I stepped inside. The carpet felt damp beneath my shoes. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold wood. A low hum pulsed beneath the floorboards. Rhythmic. Alive. I pressed my fingers against the floor. It vibrated slightly. Subtle. Insistent. Shadows clung to the corners. I felt eyes watching. Not from the window, not from the doorway. Every corner, every edge of the room seemed to lean toward me, curious, patient. The bed looked wrong. Sheets untouched, perfectly made, yet facing a wall I didn't recognize. The desk had shifted slightly, papers angled as if arranged by invisible hands. I breathed slowly. The hum beneath me continued. It rose and fell like a pulse, matching my heartbeat without trying. I shivered. Cold air pressed against my neck and wrists. I walked slowly toward the bed. The carpet whispered beneath my steps. The pale light above wavered, flickering in uneven breaths. I reached for the headboard. It was solid, familiar, but not right. The hum deepened. The floor seemed to thrum beneath my feet. I could feel it in my chest. The corners pressed harder now. Eyes everywhere, waiting. I stepped back. The desk shadowed longer, stretching toward me. The walls seemed to bend subtly, almost imperceptibly. I blinked. The room remained the same. But I felt unsteady. I leaned against the doorway. The hum softened. The air smelled faintly of rain and something older, something forgotten. I could almost hear faint static under the vibration. Or perhaps it was my own pulse. I pressed a hand to the bed, cold, solid, but distant. The hum continued, rhythmic, patient. I felt a presence in the chair, in the corners, even in the mirror's reflection, though it showed nothing but me. I didn't move further. I didn't need to. The room had changed. I had changed with it. The hallway outside was quiet. The rain had faded. The hum beneath me, subtle now, breathed with the room, alive in its stillness. I lay back on the bed, careful not to disturb it. The pale light flickered once more. The shadows remained. The eyes remained alone and yet watched. The room whispered without words. I listened and waited. The room smelled faintly of damp carpet and cold wood. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the window, slow, rhythmic. The pale light from the hallway stretched across the floor. I dropped my keys. They clinked softly against the tile. I knelt to retrieve them under the bed, eyes, pale, reflecting the dim light. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. The air pressed against my skin, heavy and still. I could smell faint dust, old linen, something metallic faintly in the corners. The eyes remained, unblinking, waiting. I reached in slowly. The keys were untouched beneath my fingers. The eyes blinked and vanished, silence. The room held its breath. The shadows seemed to stretch, leaning toward me. The carpet whispered beneath my hands. I pulled back. My heart thudded, slow and uneven. The dim light flickered once. The bed looked unchanged. And yet, I felt it. The space under the bed seemed deeper than it should be, longer, darker. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and cold metal. Every corner of the room pressed closer, curious, patient. I stayed on my knees. The keys lay where they fell. I didn't dare move them. The eyes, gone. But the feeling remained. I touched the floor beneath me, cold, solid. The hum of the room was subtle now, low, insistent. A presence lingered, patient, quiet. I straightened slowly. The room breathed around me. The shadows remained, long and still. The dim light softened, flickering like it too was hesitant. I backed toward the doorway. The carpet whispered under my steps. The air pressed gently, cold, alive. I didn't glance under the bed again, alone, and yet, not alone. The keys rested quietly. The rain tapped lightly against the glass. The pale light stretched across the floor. I breathed slowly, careful. The eyes might return, or they might wait, patient, silent. I woke to the room stretching, or maybe the hallway. It went farther than it should. Long, endless, impossibly thin. The air smelled of damp carpet and old paint. Pale light spilled unevenly across the floor. Doors lined the sides, twisting at angles my mind couldn't hold. I stepped forward. The floorboards whispered beneath my feet. The walls pulsed faintly, like a slow, living heartbeat. The ceiling felt lower, pressing against my head. I shivered. Whispers followed me. Soft, patient, curling in the corners. I couldn't make out words, only rhythm and intent. A shiver ran down my spine. I breathed slowly, trying to match it. The hallway stretched again. The doors leaned toward me, crooked, bending. The light flickered unevenly, hesitant. Shadows shifted in the corner of my vision, long, patient. The air grew thick. The walls seemed to hum, low, insistent. I pressed my hands to the warped surface. It moved under my touch, cold, alive, faintly pulsing. I walked slowly. The whispers grew sharper, circling behind me. The floor vibrated lightly beneath my shoes. I reached for a door. It resisted, solid, yet somehow wrong. I moved on. The corridor stretched farther. Impossible, infinite. The ceiling bent low, just enough to feel suffocating. The walls pulsed, slow, deliberate. A draft curled around my ankles. The air smelled faintly of wet stone, old smoke. Shadows leaned closer. I could feel their presence without seeing. I stopped. The whispers faded to a low hum, patient, steady. The walls pulsed softly. The floorboards sighed beneath me. I tried to count the doors. Lost. Each one identical, yet different. Angles twisted, walls bent. The hallway stretched farther than memory allowed. I exhaled slowly. The pale light flickered once. The hum softened. The hallway remained, alone, and yet watched. The corridor breathed with me, patient, silent, waiting. I stepped forward again. The walls pulsed softly. The doors leaned crooked, eternal. Whispers lingered in the air. And I moved carefully, slowly, into the endless corridor. The lobby smelled faintly of dust and cold linoleum. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, pale and hesitant. They flickered, slow, uneven, like a pulse I couldn't follow. Shadows crawled in the corners, long, deliberate, curling into the edges of the room. I could feel them watching, patient, quiet. The hum of the lights pressed against my ears. I counted each flicker. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm was wrong. Too fast, too slow, uneven, impossible. The shadows moved with it, bending, leaning toward me. I stepped forward. The linoleum was cold beneath my shoes. The air smelled faintly of old metal and damp carpet. The shadows shifted as if alive, brushing against my ankles. The lights skipped again. I blinked, trying to steady my gaze. And then the flicker stopped. Not in the middle of the room. Not above me. It stopped on a single door, open. The darkness beyond seemed patient. Waiting, I took a slow breath. The air was thick, damp, almost tasting of static. The hum softened, almost inaudible now. The shadows remained at the edges, curling, waiting. I stepped closer. The door didn't move. Yet it felt alive, stretching just slightly, leaning toward me. The air smelled faintly of old smoke. A draft brushed against my neck. I counted the flickers again. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm was impossible to follow. The shadows curled closer. The open door waited. I didn't move through it. I didn't need to. The lobby held its breath. The lights hummed, flickered and paused, patient, deliberate, alone. And yet, not. The open door waited quietly. The shadows lingered. The hum pressed softly against my ears. I exhaled slowly. The linoleum beneath my feet remained cold. The flickering lights resumed their uneven dance. The door remained open, patient, waiting. The drawer smelled faintly of old wood and faint smoke. I opened it slowly. Inside, a key rested on the dust, labeled "Do Not Use." Curiosity pressed against my chest. Cold and insistent, I took it. The metal felt heavy, almost warm despite the air around me. I searched for what it might unlock. One door caught my eye, a door I'd never noticed before. Its edges were faded, the handle worn, patient. I slid the key in. It turned with a soft click. The air beyond was thick, unmoving. It pressed against me, dense and silent. I stepped inside. The floorboards sighed faintly beneath my weight. The air smelled of damp linen, old stone, and something metallic, almost bitter. The pale light flickered, hesitant, curling across the walls. On the bed lay something like me. But not me. Twisted, waiting. I moved closer, slow, careful. The air pressed against my skin, heavy and unmoving. The shadows in the corners leaned toward me, curious, patient. The object shifted slightly as I approached. A reflection warped. Eyes too wide, a smile too slow. I pressed my fingers to the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged faintly. welcoming, alive. I stepped back. The air thickened. The hum of the room rose subtly, low, insistent. I could almost hear my own pulse against the stillness. The reflection waited. Patient. Still. The shadows clung to the edges, pressing, silent. I touched the key again, cold, solid. It hummed faintly in my hand, heavy with purpose. The door remained open, breathing the thick, unmoving air. I leaned closer to the bed again. The reflection shifted, curled slightly, stretching, patient. I could see my own features, but wrong. Too still, too waiting. I stepped back once more. The floorboards whispered beneath me. The air smelled faintly of smoke and rain. The shadows lingered, long and patient. I didn't move the object. I didn't touch it again. It lay on the bed waiting, and I waited too, careful, quiet. The key rested in my hand. The door breathed softly around me. The pale light pulsed gently, flickering once. The room remained silent, alone, and yet not. The object, the shadows, the unmoving air, all of it patient, waiting. I stepped back toward the hallway. The key felt heavier now. The door remained open. The reflection remained on the bed, still patient, watching. I exhaled slowly. The air settled around me. The hum softened. The shadows receded slightly. The key remained cold in my palm. The room waited. The room smelled faintly of damp sheets and cold air. Outside, rain tapped slowly against the window. The pale light from the hallway stretched across the floor. I felt it first. Icy breath, brushing the back of my neck. Slow, deliberate, patient. I froze, chest tight, every hair on my arms rising. I sat up. The bed creaked beneath me. The room was empty. The curtains swayed gently, though no wind moved them. A faint scent of wet metal lingered in the air. I drew a shallow breath. The chill returned, closer, pressing against the nape of my neck. A shiver ran down my spine. The shadows in the corners shifted slightly. The floorboards whispered faintly beneath the bed. The air felt thick, heavy, almost alive. I reached for the edge of the mattress, cold, solid beneath my fingers. The curtains moved again, curling inward, patient. The pale light above flickered. A soft hum seemed to rise from the walls. I tried to listen, tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the sensation returned. Closer, almost pressing against my skin. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and something older. Faint smoke. I breathed slowly, careful. The room held its silence, heavy and expectant. The shadows clung to the edges. The curtains leaned toward me, curling slightly. The hum softened, low, insistent. I didn't move. I couldn't move. The cold lingered, patient. I could feel it in my hair, on my shoulders, along my spine. The rain outside slowed. The air pressed heavier. The room seemed smaller, closer. Every corner watched. Every shadow waited. I finally exhaled. The chill faded slightly, leaving a memory of cold against my skin. The curtains stilled. The pale light steadied. The hum softened, alone. And yet, not alone. The breath lingered in the air, patient, waiting. I lay back slowly, careful, quiet. And the room whispered without words. The room smelled faintly of damp paint and cold stone. Pale light filtered through the window, hesitant, curling across the walls. The air was still heavy, pressing against my skin. At first it was a hum. Soft, low, almost musical. The walls vibrated faintly beneath my fingertips. I pressed my ear closer, whispers. Soft, patient, curling around the edges of the room. I couldn't understand. Just rhythms, murmurs, shadows of sound. I moved slowly along the wall. The paint felt cold, slightly damp. The hum pulsed in time with my heartbeat, slow, steady. The whispers grew clearer, curling into words. Leave. Never come back. The sound pressed against me, echoed in the corners, in the cracks, in the shadows. I shivered. The air smelled faintly of wet stone, old wood, and something bitter, metallic. I pressed my hands flat against the wall. It hummed back, alive, patient. The whispers swirled around me, low and insistent. I stepped back. The floor beneath me creaked faintly, uneven, responding. Shadows stretched toward me in the pale light. The words repeated, slower, deliberate. Leave. Never come back. I tried to breathe slowly. The wall seemed to lean closer, patient, waiting. The whispers echoed, curling in rhythm with my pulse. Every corner, every shadow, every edge pressed against me. I moved cautiously. The air felt thick, damp, alive. The hum deepened. The words lingered in the silence, repeating. Soft, insistent, patient. I reached the center of the room. The light flickered faintly. The shadows clung to the corners. The walls seemed to breathe with the words, leave. Never come back. I didn't touch them again. I didn't move closer. I stayed still, careful, listening. The air pressed gently against my skin. The hum softened slightly, patient, low, alone. And yet, not alone. The walls whispered, patient, waiting. I breathed slowly, careful, quiet. The pale light stretched across the floor. The words echoed once more. Leave, never come back. And then, silence. The room held its breath. The shadows remained, and I waited. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and old perfume. Pale light from the hallway stretched across the floor, hesitant. The air was still, heavy, pressing against my skin. I glanced in the mirror. Something shifted behind me. A figure, pale, silent, waiting. I froze. The air felt colder there, heavier. I could almost hear a faint hum, low and insistent, beneath the quiet. I turned slowly. Nothing. The room remained empty. My reflection smirked, slow, deliberate, a motion my lips hadn't made. I touched my own mouth. It remained still. The pale light flickered. Shadows leaned toward the edges of the room, patient, curling. The carpet whispered faintly beneath my feet. The air smelled faintly of damp stone, metallic and bitter. I stepped back. The reflection remained, curling its smirk. Patient, waiting. I could feel its gaze in my chest, in my throat, along my spine. The hum beneath the quiet rose subtly. I pressed my fingertips to the dresser. Cold, solid, real. The reflection leaned slightly, closer, patient. I could almost see my own heartbeat mirrored in its eyes. I exhaled slowly, careful. The room's shadows clung to the corners, stretching long, curling faintly. The reflection remained, patient, smirking, alive in the stillness. I stepped back toward the doorway. The air pressed heavier against me. The hum softened, low, insistent, like breathing beneath the floorboards. The mirror remained, silent, watching, alone. And yet, not. The smirk lingered. The shadows stretched, patient. I breathed slowly, careful, quiet. The light flickered once more. The air settled slightly, cool, still. The mirror remained, and I waited. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and old varnish. Pale light stretched across the floor, hesitant, curling along the walls. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing against my skin. I stepped forward. The floorboards shivered beneath my feet. A subtle movement, slow, deliberate, alive. It shifted like water, curling and rippling beneath me. I stumbled slightly. The patterns changed as I watched. Lines twisted into shapes, faces forming briefly, then dissolving. Eyes blinked, mouths whispered, and the wood seemed to breathe. The hum of the room rose faintly, low and insistent. I pressed my fingers to the floor. Cold, solid, yet moving beneath my touch. The shapes shifted again, curling and stretching, patient. I took a slow step back. The floor rippled in response, stretching the shapes into something new. A faint scent of damp stone and faint smoke rose from the wood. The shadows in the corners leaned closer, watching. I held my breath. The patterns grew sharper, forming faces I recognized, or almost recognized. They whispered quietly, patient, curling around my ankles, my shoes. I stepped lightly, careful, listening. The floorboards pulsed beneath me, alive, deliberate. The whispers rose slightly, rhythmic, curling in the silence. I could feel my heartbeat in time with the motion beneath my feet. The pale light flickered. The shadows stretched across the walls. Faces formed briefly, lingering just long enough to unsettle. I pressed my hands to the floor again. It shifted faintly, patient, alive. I exhaled slowly, careful. The shapes dissolved, curling back into the grain of the wood. The room hummed softly, insistent, low. I remained still, listening, feeling the movement beneath me, alone. And yet, not alone. The floor breathed, patient, whispering without words. I stepped slowly toward the edge of the room, careful, quiet. The patterns rippled once more. Faces, shapes, shifting shadows. Then, stillness. The air settled slightly, cool, heavy. The floor remained alive beneath my feet. And I waited. The room smelled faintly of damp linen and cold metal. A single lamp sat in the corner, its light soft, pale, hesitant. Outside, the rain tapped slowly against the window. The lamp dimmed slightly, then brighter, then dimmed again, pulsating. Like a heartbeat, shadows stretched across the walls, long, thin, connecting ceiling to floor in impossible angles. They whispered softly as they swayed, patient, deliberate. I breathed slowly, careful. The air smelled faintly of wet wood and faint smoke. A rustling came from the far corner, soft, subtle, curling around the edges of the room. I leaned forward slightly, careful not to startle. The shadows stretched closer. The hum of the room rose faintly, low, insistent. The lamp pulsed again, heartbeat slow, steady. The rustling repeated, faintly sharper this time, like soft footsteps, careful, deliberate. I pressed my hands against the edge of the bed, cold, solid, grounding me in the room's shifting light. I stepped back slightly. The shadows leaned inward, curling, patient. The lamp's pulse grew slower, heavier, like the breath of the room itself. The rustling softened, lingering just beyond sight. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The shadows remained, stretching, waiting. The lamp's heartbeat softened, then dimmed almost entirely, alone. And yet, not alone. The air pressed gently against my skin, patient. The rustling lingered in the corners. The shadows clung to the edges. I exhaled slowly, careful. The lamp flickered once more, faint, pale. The room settled slightly, still, quiet. The rustling faded. The shadows stretched long and patient. I lay back slowly. The pale light touched the walls. The hum softened, low, insistent, alone. And yet, the room waited. The hallway smelled faintly of damp earth and cold stone. Pale light from the room behind me stretched across the floor. The air pressed gently against my skin, heavy, patient. I turned the knob slowly. The door creaked softly. A darkened hallway stretched before me, long, quiet, impossible. Shadows clung to the corners, patient, waiting. I stepped forward carefully. The floor felt solid beneath my feet, yet the air felt alive. A faint rustling curled around the edges of the walls. The smell of damp earth grew stronger, rising from the floorboards. A shadow lingered near the far end. Motionless, silent. I could feel its gaze in my chest, along my shoulders, patient, waiting. I blinked. The shadow vanished. Just like that. The air pressed slightly cooler, heavier, curling around me. I inhaled slowly. The walls seemed to lean inward slightly, patient, alive. The hallway hummed faintly, low, insistent, like a pulse beneath the floor. I could almost hear whispers curling along the edges of the shadows. I stepped forward again, careful, deliberate. The floorboards whispered beneath me, faint, uneven. The light from behind stretched longer, pale, hesitant. The shadow might have returned, or maybe it never left. I pressed my hand to the wall, cold, solid, grounding me. The air smelled of wet stone, faintly metallic and damp earth. The silence hung thick, patient, like it was waiting for me to move. I exhaled slowly. The hallway seemed to stretch farther than before. Shadows curled in subtle patterns, patient, deliberate. The floor hummed softly beneath me, low, insistent, alone. And yet, not alone. The air pressed gentle, careful around me. The shadow lingered at the edges of perception, patient, watching. I stepped back toward the room behind me. The door frame felt slightly warmer than the walls. The shadows remained patient, curling just beyond the light. The faint hum continued beneath my feet, steady, alive. I paused at the threshold. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, old wood, and quiet secrets. The shadow might have blinked again. Or maybe it had always been there. I stood still, careful, listening. The hallway whispered without words. The shadows clung to the edges, alone. And yet, the room waited. The room smelled faintly of old wood and cold air. Pale morning light filtered through the curtains, hesitant, soft. The sheets pressed cool against my skin. I sat up slowly. The furniture shifted. Chairs hovered slightly above the floor, bending gravity. Patient. A dresser pressed gently against the ceiling, impossibly still. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was waiting. The floor hummed faintly beneath me, low, insistent, alive. I leaned forward slightly. The chairs wavered, rocking gently, as if breathing. Silence held the room like a vice. I could hear the faint rustling of fabric as the curtains trembled. Shadows curled along the walls, patient, deliberate. The dresser above seemed to hum faintly in the still air. I pressed my hands to the floor, cold solid grounding me. The room smelled faintly of damp wood and faint smoke. The chairs shifted again, floating lazily, patient, alive. I stepped carefully between them. The air clung to my skin, humid, heavy. The dresser above pressed silently against the ceiling, unmoving yet impossible. The shadows stretched along the corners of the room, patient, curling. I exhaled slowly, careful. The chair swayed gently, almost in rhythm with my heartbeat. The room seemed to breathe slowly, deliberate. I could feel the weight of the impossible pressing down around me. I moved toward the doorway. The floor hummed softly beneath my feet. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and old wood. The furniture remained suspended, patient, watching, alone. And yet, not alone, the shadows clung to the edges of the room. The silence lingered, heavy, careful. I stood still, breathing slow, quiet, waiting. The light flickered faintly. The chairs swayed just a fraction, bending the air around them. The dresser pressed gently, impossibly above. The room watched, patient. I stepped back toward the bed. The air pressed gently against my skin. The shadows curled closer to the corners. The silence remained, thick, insistent. I lay back slowly. The pale light touched the floating furniture. The hum softened beneath the floor. Alone. And yet, the room waited. The hallway smelled faintly of damp carpet and old wood. Pale light filtered softly through the frosted windows. The air pressed gentle and cool against my skin. A laugh echoed from the corridor, hollow, distant, curling around the corners. It lingered, patient, twisting with the shadows. I stepped outside my room. The floorboards pressed cold beneath my feet. The laugh repeated, softer this time, curling along the walls. I could feel it in my chest, low and insistent. The hallway stretched farther than it should. Doors leaned slightly, angles impossible. Shadows clung to the corners, patient, curling. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and old paper. I leaned forward slightly, careful. The laughter swirled, distant, near, impossible to place. The silence between echoes pressed heavier than the sound. The floor hummed faintly, low, insistent, like it remembered footsteps I had not taken. I paused, breath slow. The shadows leaned inward, curling along the edges of the walls. The hallway seemed to stretch, bend, impossible. The laugh followed, curling, patient, mocking. I took another step. The air pressed cooler, damp against my skin. The floor hummed beneath me. The shadows swayed, patient, deliberate, alone. And yet, not alone. The laugh twisted again, faint, distant. It lingered along the walls, soft, insistent. I pressed a hand against the wall, cold, solid, grounding me. The smell of damp carpet and old wood grew stronger. The shadows shifted slightly, patient, curling just beyond the light. I stepped forward again. The laugh softened, almost a whisper, curling along the corners. The hallway stretched farther than before, impossible angles in every direction. The hum beneath the floor grew faintly louder, alive, deliberate. I paused at the far door. The shadows clung to the edges. The air pressed gentle against my skin. The laugh lingered, patient, twisting with the silence. I exhaled slowly. The hallway settled slightly, quiet, patient. The shadows remained, curling along the walls. Alone. And yet, the corridor waited. The room smelled faintly of damp carpet and cold air. The lamp cast pale light across the walls, gentle, hesitant. Outside, fog pressed against the window, thick, unyielding. I leaned closer. The glass felt cold against my cheek. Shapes moved within the fog, patient, waiting. I could almost hear the soft rustling of air curling around the edges of the glass. One shape lingered near the corner, darker than the gray swirl. It shifted slowly, deliberate, curling closer. The air smelled faintly of wet stone, heavy, pressing. My breath fogged the window as I pressed my face closer. The shape stretched toward me, slow, deliberate. I could see fingers, or something like them, pressing against the swirling gray. The hum of the room grew faint, low, vibrating beneath the floor. I could feel it in my chest, patient, insistent. The fog swirled around the reaching shape. It twisted impossibly, curling, patient, deliberate. Shadows in the corners of the room bent slightly toward the window. The air pressed damp and cool against my skin, heavy with anticipation. I stepped back, careful. The lamp flickered, pale light catching the edges of the shapes. The fingers withdrew slightly, patient, curling in the fog. The smell of wet stone grew stronger, clinging to the edges of the room, alone. And yet, not alone. The shapes pressed closer, curling along the glass, patient. The hum beneath the floor persisted, low and insistent. I pressed my hands to the windowsill, cold, grounding me. The shapes shifted slowly, deliberate, waiting. The fog swirled in impossible patterns, curling, twisting. I could almost hear whispers beneath the hum, patient, insistent. I exhaled slowly. The shapes lingered, curling in the gray just beyond my touch. The shadows bent slightly toward the window, patient, deliberate. The air pressed damp and cold against my skin, heavy with presence. I stepped back from the glass. The fog shifted, curling, patient, waiting. The hum beneath the floor softened slightly, alive, deliberate. The shapes remained, watching, patient, impossible. I sat back slowly, heart quieting, breath shallow. The window held the gray swirl, patient, curling. The room smelled faintly of damp air and old wood. Alone. And yet, the shapes waited. The room smelled faintly of cold air and damp wood. The lamp cast pale light across the blankets, uneven, soft. I noticed first the bed, slightly moved, as if someone had just left it. The sheets were cold, heavy with the weight of absence. I reached out a hand, fingers brushing the chill, hesitant. The blankets rustled faintly under my touch. Too quiet, too deliberate. On the nightstand, a cup of water sat empty. Its rim caught the dim light, pale and still. I could feel the air press damp and heavy against my skin, waiting, alone. And yet, not entirely. A presence lingered, patient, impossible to see. The hum of the room felt low, vibrating beneath the floor. Shadows bent slightly, subtle, curling along the edges of the walls. I breathed slowly, careful, trying not to disturb what was already here. I ran my hand across the sheets again. The chill remained, deeper now, lingering, insistent. The cup sat, empty and still, waiting. I leaned closer to the window. The glass felt cold and unyielding. Outside, fog pressed against the frame, swirling softly, patient. The room felt smaller, the corners heavier. A shadow seemed to drift just beyond sight, curling, waiting. The blankets moved faintly again, as if breathing. I stepped back, careful. The lamp flickered, pale light stretching across the walls. I could feel eyes, imagined or real, in every corner. I sank slowly into the chair by the bed. The room smelled of damp air and faint wood. The bed sat, moved slightly, patient, holding space for what had been here. I dared not move the cup. I dared not pull back the sheets. The presence lingered, silent, unseen, patient, alone. And yet, someone had been here, and might still be waiting in the cold. The hallway stretched long and narrow, dim light spilling from a single bulb. The carpet felt soft underfoot, yet the air pressed damp and cold against my skin. I moved slowly, careful, each step echoing faintly. A whisper brushed against my ear. My name. Soft, urgent, curling around the corners. I stopped. The walls seemed closer now, pulsing faintly, breathing with me. Each door I passed shifted subtly, a line crooked, a handle higher than before. The air smelled faintly of old paper and damp wood. I pressed my hand to the wall, feeling vibrations beneath my palm, low and steady. The whisper came again, repeating, following, patient. Shadows pooled in the corners, dark and thick. I could feel the carpet beneath my toes, uneven as if it were alive. Every door seemed to glance at me, tilting slightly in response to my gaze. I took a slow breath. The whisper wound around me, closer, curling in the silence between my steps. I felt eyes, unseen, tracking me, patient, unblinking. A faint hum rose beneath the floorboards. The air was heavy, thick, carrying the smell of dust and something colder, something older. I ran my fingers along the wall. It felt warmer in one spot, cooler in the next. The doors twisted again as I passed. A knob gleamed, then receded into shadow. I felt the hallway stretch longer, walls bending just enough to make the light uneven. The whisper lingered. Soft, echoing, insistent. It breathed with me, moved with me, never leaving. I stopped mid-step. The hallway held its breath. Silence pressed thick, almost tangible, almost alive. The shadows flickered, stretching toward me, then shrinking back. I could feel the carpet rise slightly beneath my feet, as if sighing. The whisper repeated my name again, closer, sharper, more intimate. I reached the end of the hall. The air smelled faintly of fog and cold metal. The doors behind me had straightened again, normal, as if nothing had shifted at all. I turned slowly, hand lingering on the wall. The whisper had vanished. Only the hum of the building remained, low, patient, waiting, alone. Yet the memory of it lingered, curling around my ears and in the corners of the hallway. And I knew as I walked away it would follow. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. A pale light spilled through the blinds, dust floating in slow, lazy spirals. I sat on the edge of the bed, alone, listening to the hum of the radiator. In the corner, something moved, or perhaps it had always been there. A shadow, too dark, too heavy, not belonging to any shape I knew. It pulsed gently, a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. I held my breath. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and something older, hidden. The carpet beneath my fingers was soft, warm, yet the shadow made the floor feel cold. It shifted minutely as I watched, leaning into the shape of the room yet remaining its own. Every time I blinked, it seemed to lean closer, breathing in sync with me. A soft rustling came from the corner like fabric or leaves, though nothing moved. I could feel my pulse in my temples. The shadow pulsed again, slow, deliberate, almost patient. It was alive. I reached toward it, hand trembling slightly, fingertips brushing the air between us. The corner stayed empty to touch, yet the presence was undeniable, oppressive. It whispered in a language I didn't understand, a quiet, vibrating hum against my skin. The radiator hummed lower, the room exhaling slowly. I smelled the faint tang of ozone, or maybe it was just the fear in the air. The shadow pulsed again, perfectly timed with my own shallow breaths. I tried to move, but the bed felt heavier beneath me. The corners of the room seemed darker, the ceiling slightly lower. The shadow did not waver. It only waited, patient, breathing with me. A soft creak came from the floorboards behind me. I didn't dare look. My eyes stayed locked on that corner. The pulsing slowed, then quickened, as if sensing my heartbeat racing. I whispered my own name, quiet, tentative, and the shadow seemed to quiver slightly in response. A cold draft rose from the corner, brushing my skin, smelling faintly of earth and rust. It lingered there in the corner, watching, waiting, alive without form. I shifted on the bed, trying to break my gaze. The shadow followed every move, pulsing, stretching slightly toward me, yet never leaving the corner. Silence filled the rest of the room, yet the corner hummed softly, alive. I exhaled slowly. The shadow remained, quiet now, patient, its rhythm aligned with mine. I felt both exposed and tethered, alone yet not alone. The room's light dimmed imperceptibly. The dust in the air drifted slower, heavier, like it feared to move. And the shadow continued its quiet, pulsing vigil. I lay back on the bed, hands pressed to my chest. Every pulse, every breath, matched the shadow's silent rhythm. It waited. I closed my eyes. And though the rest of the room was still, I could feel it there. breathing, watching, alive in the corner. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit by a single pale bulb. Each step on the wooden floorboards shivered under my feet, cold seeping up my legs. The air smelled faintly of dust and damp, a metallic tang I couldn't place. I paused. The silence pressed against me, thick, almost tangible. Then I moved again, slow, deliberate. With every step, the cold crawled higher. It wasn't just the floor. It felt like the chill had fingers brushing my skin, gripping my calves. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, fogging in the narrow light. I glanced behind me. The hallway was empty, but the floorboards held footprints, my footprints, yet not. They appeared in pairs, perfectly spaced, as if someone else had walked this path moments ago. I froze. The wood beneath my hands was icy, clammy. The walls seemed closer here, the shadows stretching unnaturally. A faint rustling came from the far end of the hall, soft, hesitant. I thought it might be my imagination. Step by step, I moved again. Each footfall sent tremors of cold into my bones. The footprints multiplied behind me, forming a silent echo of my own movement. The air grew heavier, almost wet, clinging to my skin. I could hear the subtle creak of floorboards, though I hadn't shifted yet. A low hum seemed to resonate from beneath, deep and steady. I leaned closer to the wall, tracing it with my fingertips. Rough, splintered wood, yet it felt warmer than the floor. The cold radiated upward, relentless whispering of unseen presence. I stopped, breathed. The footprints behind me paused too, as if waiting. My eyes followed them down the hall, where shadows pooled like ink. The footprints were there still, perfectly formed, yet I hadn't stepped back. A faint rustling echoed from nowhere, soft, like cloth brushing against skin. I forced myself to move forward again. Each step was agony, ice climbing, clawing at my calves, thighs, my spine. The footprints multiplied behind me, copying each movement I made. I tried to ignore them, tried to convince myself the hall was empty. But the cold pressed tighter, wrapping around my ankles, curling like smoke. The shadows seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. I reached the end of the hall. The footprints ended abruptly, fading into the darkness. The cold lingered, though, stiff and alive, curling up my legs even as I stopped moving. I stood there, chest tight, hands trembling. The hallway held its silence, waiting, patient. And the footprints, those impossible footprints, waited too, frozen in time, a quiet reminder of someone. Or something. Following, I exhaled slowly. The air tasted faintly metallic, my own fear tangling with it. And then I turned back, slowly, knowing the floor would be empty again. But the cold stayed, and I could still feel the footprints pressed lightly into my memory. The hall stretched farther than I remembered. Shadows clung to the edges, thin and restless. A chill settled in the air, heavy, almost wet. At the end, a doorway appeared, one I had never seen. The wood was dark, worn smooth and cold beneath my fingertips. I hesitated. Inside the room was still, but the air hummed faintly, a vibration that pressed against my chest. The scent of old stone and dust wrapped around me. The walls were mirrors. Every angle reflected shadows, but no light. Nothing moved, yet the reflections shifted, curling at the edges. I stepped forward, toes brushing the floor. The wood was cold, clammy, clinging. Each footfall echoed softly, swallowed almost instantly by silence. I leaned closer to one mirror. The glass was smooth, but it felt alive beneath my palm. I could see my outline, pale and stiff, but the shadows around me moved differently. Something watched. I felt it before I saw it. The air thickened, pressing against my skin, curling around my shoulders. I turned slowly. The mirrors multiplied the shadows, stretching the corners, bending the room into shapes that shouldn't exist. A soft rustling whispered behind me, or maybe inside me. My reflection lingered, slightly delayed, smirking when I did not. The shadows twisted toward me, swaying gently, as if breathing with the rhythm of my own chest. I swallowed hard. A low hum rose from the floorboards, faint, rhythmic. It matched my heartbeat, slow and steady. I could smell damp stone, faint decay, and something metallic close to my ear. I reached for the nearest wall, tracing it with my fingers. Cold glass, smooth, unyielding. The shadows in the mirror bent and bowed, shaping themselves around me, and yet they did not touch. I stepped back. The room seemed to pulse with my movement. Every mirror reflected not just me, but the empty space behind me, dark and waiting. I wanted to look away. I wanted to run. But my feet were rooted, cold, seeping into my bones. The shadows twisted again, forming angles my mind could not name. They moved in tandem, silent, deliberate. A soft, almost imperceptible rustle circled the room, brushing the walls, brushing the air. I whispered my own name. The mirrors answered subtly, bending the letters of light into shapes I could not read. I felt eyes, hundreds, thousands in each pane, tracking, patient. The hum deepened, filling the small space, vibrating through the soles of my feet. I pressed my palms to the mirrors. Cold, harder than stone, yet alive. The shadows shifted again. I leaned closer, squinting, trying to see the source. There was none. Only endless reflection, endless watching. I stepped back. The doorway behind me was distant now, farther than it should be. The hall beyond seemed swallowed by shadow. The air was heavy, thick with breath not my own. I drew a slow, shallow breath, fogging the glass faintly. My own outline stared back, twisted, not quite right. I exhaled. The hum softened. The room seemed to pulse one last time, quiet, patient, and then I moved, slowly, carefully, each step measured, leaving the mirrors behind. But the sense of being watched lingered. Faint and cold, pressing against my back, I stepped through the doorway. The hall returned, dim and familiar. The room behind me vanished, as though it had never been, yet the mirrors, I could still feel them in my mind, reflecting shadows that were never there. The hallway stretched quiet and pale. Fog clung to the corners, curling along the floor. The air smelled of damp stone and something faintly metallic. I paused at the threshold of the last room. The shadows lingered at the edges, patient, unmoving. A low hum rose beneath the floorboards, almost imperceptible. Inside, the room was still. The mirrors I had passed earlier were gone, replaced by pale walls. But the air felt heavy, alive, pressing softly against my skin. A whisper trembled from the corner. "You can never leave." It was close, intimate, brushing along my cheek like cold breath. I froze. The words hung in the air, stretching and bending, following my heartbeat. I could feel the space breathe with me, slow and deliberate. I took a step back. The floor beneath my feet was cold, pressing icy fingers up my legs. The fog outside the doorway shifted, reaching in, curling around the edges of the room. My hand brushed the wall. It was solid, rough, yet faintly warm, as if the room itself was exhaling. The whisper came again, softer, almost patient. I turned slowly, trying to see its source. Nothing moved. The corner was empty, yet the presence lingered, thick and pressing. I exhaled, my breath fogging in the dim light. The hum under the floor rose, synchronizing with my pulse. It was steady, endless, like the heartbeat of the place. I stepped toward the doorway. Each movement was measured, careful, dragging the sensation of unseen eyes along with me. The fog outside shivered, stretching like fingers, brushing against my ankles. I reached the threshold. The hallway beyond was pale, familiar, yet twisted in the edges of my vision. The whisper followed, curling softly around my ears, brushing the nape of my neck. I moved forward. The floorboards beneath me were cold, solid, yet vibrating faintly with life. The fog trailed, dense and silent, clinging to the air like smoke. I glanced back once. The room behind me seemed to breathe, the corner empty yet full. The whisper lingered, softer now, fading yet insistent. "You can never leave." I exhaled slowly. The chill seeped through my clothes, through my skin, settling into my chest. I felt the acceptance press in, the quiet understanding that I had stepped into something larger than myself. The fog outside thickened, swirling at my feet. It was patient, watchful, alive. I could smell damp earth, faint decay, and a trace of something metallic lingering in the folds of the mist. I walked forward. Each step was heavy, echoing faintly in the hollow space of the hallway. The whisper remained in my mind, not loud but present, threading through my thoughts. I did not run. There was no escape, only forward, into the dim, fog-wrapped corridor, carrying the weight of what had been whispered. The hallway stretched ahead, pale and silent. Shadows pressed along the walls, long and patient, echoing the rhythm of my breathing. The air trembled, still pulsing with that quiet, endless voice. I stepped fully into the fog. It wrapped around me, cold and soft, filling the space between each heartbeat. The whisper lingered, a shadow brushing along the edges of my mind, reminding me, always, you can never leave. The air settled around me. The fog moved with me, patient, steady. I exhaled, and I walked forward,